Okay, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Another game from the Fide World Cup, round 3, game 2. This game is between GM Fedoseev with the white pieces and American Grandmaster and fan favorite GM Hikaru Nakamura with the black pieces. Now, this is round 3, game 2. Both players had drew their first game, so a decisive result in this game would result in the elimination of one of these players. So let's get into it. Again, Fedosiev, white pieces, Nakamura, black pieces. Game started off e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Are we going to see a Roy Lopez or what? Nope. Knight c3. And now, what kind of game are we going to get? Now we have what is known as, guess what? The Four Knights game. Alright. So, now this opening, it's not seen too much at top levels because of its drawer's reputation, but nevertheless, it's a great surprise weapon, especially nowadays. I mean, the Berlin has been analyzed to death, and just being able to switch up or even find a little kernel of a new idea in an old opening may be enough to get you that one victory that you're looking for. But this opening goes back to the days of Tarish, Schlechter, Marazzi, and back in those days, those masters played this with the intention of winning. But nowadays, it's usually played with drawing intentions. Okay, so it's a solid opening, but it just lacks the threats. And combine this with the symmetrical structure, it is definitely useful as a drawing weapon. All right. So, speaking of symmetry, now this is called the Spanish Four Knights variation because, of course, the bishop coming out here, um, you know, and with similar ideas to the Ruy Lopez, putting pressure on the e5 pawn indirectly by attacking its defender. All right. Of course, the difference between this and the Spanish is that this knight is committed early to c3 already, where normally we get c3, d5, etc. So the options for white are limited. So it's kind of like a baby Ruy Lopez as opposed to a full-grown one. So what do we play here? Now, the main line, one of the main lines here is to continue along with the symmetry. Bishop b5, bishop b4, castles, castles, and then you have d3 and d6. And you can see, and I'll just keep going just for the sake of clarity, you can see the symmetry all the way up to move 7 so far. And in here, this situation, you can see that with this bishop on g5, it's not wise to keep going with the symmetry because now, after, say, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight d5, and white is the first to be able to initiate threats here. So, for instance, after queen d8, bishop takes, b takes, knight takes b4, and white is better. Again, if bishop takes f6, bishop takes f3, queen takes, again, it's always white that's first. Again, with the same idea. This is why the symmetry breaks, and after bishop g5, bishop g4 is not played, but bishop takes c3. Black gives up the bishop here and gives white double pawns, but he stops this threat of the knight jumping to d5 to enhance this pin. And play goes queen e7. Of course, bishop d7 can be played, knight e7 Rook e1, knight d8. The idea is to bring this knight here. d4. Two moves played here, bishop g4 and knight e6. Knight e6. And then the bishop drops back to c1. And we have an equal game. White has a slight space advantage. He has his two bishops. White has an ultra solid pawn structure. His king is well protected. And, you know, these games normally lead toward drawish waters. So what happened after years of practice in that scenario, Rubinstein, Akiba Rubinstein came along and said, let's spice this up. And immediately creates an imbalance, right? Breaks the symmetry by playing knight d4 here. And this is what Nakamura played in the game. And knight d4 is a dynamic continuation. But what's funny is that White can actually force a drawish endgame by simply exchanging on d4. So that's what's funny, is like you try to play dynamically, but you know, White is always you know, in control here. And I'll just show you that real quick. So for instance, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, e takes d4. So a forced e5, d takes, queen takes, d takes, check, queen e2, bishop e2, d5, and bishop f4, and c6, and you had this drawish looking endgame. This great pawn structure is not going to be good enough to create a passed pawn, because even though White's pawn structure is busted up, it's still good enough to stop the creation of a passed pawn. And then of course you can see each side has the same material, two bishops, two rooks, king in the same spot. And again, that's just showing you why you don't really see this type of opening here. However, Fedoseev did not play this drawing line here, but he actually played bishop c4. Now, there's different moves that can be played here. Of course, I want you to see that this pawn is on prise. That's one of the lines. Knight takes. And the idea here is it's not an oversight by black, but what it is black is trying to lure White into basically neglecting his development, and in turn for the pawn get an active game. Queen e7. So now you see all this pressure down here since White has stolen the pawn. So f4. The bishop pair is gone. It's another slight plus. d6, dealing with this threat here and hitting this guy. Knight f3. Queen takes e4 check. King f2, with the idea of doing that. Right? Knight g4 check. King g1. Queen c6, attacking this guy. Knight 5 d4, and then queen c5. Queen d7 is also, you know, initiating this pin. Queen d7 might even be a better option there. Now notice the effect that this dynamic play has had on the White position. Right, the rook is in the corner, the king can't castle, and White's position looks really awkward. Okay, so that's to show you just one of the major continuations here. Also, instead of bishop c4, bishop a4. Again, one of the main continuations. Play continues. Bishop c5. Again, ignoring this pawn and going for an active game. So remember that theme when you play the Rubinstein variation as black, you're looking for activity and dynamic play. So knight takes e4, castles, knight d3, attacking this guy, bishop b6, e5, knight e8, castle, and now d6, attacking this advanced pawn. This bishop here, so don't even think about playing f4. Therefore, this is forced, and the knight is resurrected back to d6. King h1, right, getting off of this diagonal, and then once again c6, which is one of many moves that can be played. Also in this position, queen g5 is an option because the d pawn cannot be pushed because of the position of the knight. So again, this is all to show you black's major ideas, and notice that black is still a pawn down, so he must make something out of his early activity. And again, practice has shown through the years that this is pretty good for black, that he obtains enough compensation for the pawns. And you could just see in this example the awkwardness of the position with the knight on d3. So it's going to take a couple of moves to get, you know, these queenside pieces into play, and you know, it takes time to do that. And of course, when you give black time, that gives him time to create attacking chances and create possibilities. So that's his compensation for the pawn. So now that we've got that little introduction out the way, maybe I should just do like an opening video and then just leave that for that. But anyway, bishop c4 is played during the game. Another possibility. Bishop c5, again we see the pawn left on prise. d3, and of course the modern player is not, you know, going after, you know, just snatching up pawns. He understands, hey, I don't want to fall behind in development. c6, Nakamura wants to exploit the fact that this bishop is here and hit with d5. Again, he's saying go ahead, take the pawn. Knight takes e5. He does take it. Castle. And knight takes f7. So we're seeing imbalance here. Rook takes f7. Bishop takes f7. So two pieces for the rook. And slightly exposed king. And two pawns. So the position is very unbalanced at this point. Bishop e3, knight e6, bishop takes, and knight takes c5. And after this move, I like white's position here. It seems that white has turned the tables. Remember, black started out with the idea to play dynamic, and then it seems somewhere along the line, maybe a few moves ago, where now he seems to be getting pushed back by white. Now white has a very solid position, and he's behind the development himself, but his play seems easier. For instance, with this backward pawn here, it's difficult for black to develop his queenside pieces. And he has to be careful also of this knight ending up here on d6, especially after, you know, kicking this knight away. All right, so a very dangerous position. Knight e8, d4, though, so the pawns are moving the knights out of the way. And notice that although technically black is up material, let's look at the quality of the material. It's not that good. So the the two pawn advantage that white has is more of a factor at this point than the extra piece, right? Because remember, it's two a knight and a bishop for the rook. So those two pawns are more of a factor right now because they're rolling up the board and pushing black's pieces further and further back. At this point, the time factor was telling. Nakamura had 40 minutes on the clock. Fedoseev had 1 hour and 12 minutes. So it seems that he was ready, and he had Nakamura backpedaling at this point. Castles, d6, the right thing to do. You have to challenge this structure. F4. So again, utilizing the extra pawns in the position. Let me remind you again, in the famous book called Blockade by Nimzovich. Now this is different from my system. Everybody knows about my system, but Nimzovich used to also write articles and such. And in this particular book, pamphlet rather, called Blockade, he gives 3 reasons for a central pawn advance. Alright, he's specifically talking about the central pawns. He gives 3 reasons. 1, restraint or restriction of the pieces. Right? 2, to drive a wedge in the formation. In other words, dividing the queen side and king side, driving a wedge. And you see this concept a lot. For instance, the Albin counter gambit. Right? Not saying it's good or anything, but notice how black, after d4, d4, d5, c4, e5, right? D takes e5, he drives a wedge into the position by playing d4. Same with the, hold on, I forgot we have new players, so I can't expect you to see it visually all the time. I know a lot of you can, you know, the stronger players, but just bear with me. Okay, here's the Albin counter gambit. Again, not saying it's good or anything, but this is a wedge. Okay. Another example, King's Gambit. Fork bear. And here's the old variation. Again, wedge. One more example. Let's see, let's do here. King's Indian attack. Whoops. And let's say, c4, castle, knight c6, d3, bishop e7, and let's just this castle here. And here would be an example of a wedge. I'm not, again, this is probably premature, but I just wanted to show you. And notice how this wedge divides the board. You have all this stuff on the queen side, and it breaks communication lines from the queen side and the king side. Okay? So I gave you 2 reasons so far. There's the 3rd reason for advancing central pawns, or also to open lines. Okay? And I'm not going to go into examples of that because you should all know what open lines look like. Usually it's like an open E file or open D file or something like that. You know, when you're ahead in development, and let's get back to the position. You're ahead in development and you need to open lines, whether it be a sacrifice or what have you. Matter of fact, a good game to, for example, is a game I just analyzed, which happened in the 3rd round also, between GM Matlikov and Levon Aronian. So if you want to see that reason demonstrated, right, which is advancing the central pawns to open lines, look at that game. That'll give you the 3rd reason illustrated perfectly. So again, we have restriction or restraint of the pieces. Let me give you an example of that real quick again. I'll show a basic. And we see the pawn advance here. Okay. And that's what it does. It restricts the pieces. See, this piece has to move back, right? It has to move somewhere. See, that's the other reason, just to give you. So there's restraint or restriction of the pieces, right? There's the wedge. And I just gave you some examples of that, and there is also the opening of lines. So those are your three reasons for advancing pawns in the center. And you can even see it right there. See the restriction of pieces. See how this advance right here knocks this knight, forces the knight to go somewhere. Right? That's an example of restriction. Again, restriction and restraint. The other pawn advance forces this knight to go somewhere. Okay. Now, if we look at Nakamura's pawn advance, what's the purpose? To open lines, right? He wants to trade this off, but the ultimate result is that the lines get open. Now, if they're for his favor or not, that's neither here nor there, because at this point he has to open lines for his pieces. Okay, so F4, right? Just fortifying the center, right? So now he's sending Nakamura the message like, all right, you want to open lines? Then you're going to open lines for this rook right here. You know, he's saying open this. D takes, F takes, E5 check. What do you do? You know, so good game by White so far. White is in the driver's seat, have no doubt about it. Okay. Now, Black's goal, of course, is to try to make this extra piece count. The only way you can do that is you have to get the pieces coordinated. All right. So one thing I see is this D5 square. Maybe this knight can come here to here, right? Or one of these knights should be on D5. Okay. Perhaps, maybe even this knight. And that's Black's biggest problem, is the pieces are uncoordinated. Right, and White's pieces easily can jump into the mix. Right, it's easy to start attacking here. Right, but first White must deal with the situation of this pawn. Right, because now the pawn is get rid of some graphics. After the check and king move, this pawn is now attacked twice. Okay, so the simplest idea seems to be knight d2, but you want to look a little further in the position, because again, these pieces are very awkward. So if you could like ignore this, maybe in attack, even there's a check. Say for instance a move like queen f3. You know, the idea of playing queen at f7. You have to look deeply into that, because initiative is very important here. Because if Black is allowed to consolidate, he'll have the extra piece. Okay, because with all other things being equal, a bishop and a knight is better than the rook. And again, the key word or the key phrase is all other things being equal. Here it's not. Here, White has Black has two. White has two pawns, right, that are highly restrictive in nature on the Black position, and Black has a lot of trouble getting out. All right. So of course, if given time, Black will get out and coordinate. So that dictates that speed is of essence for White. He plays d5. Okay, so he didn't pick the solution that I was looking at, which was queen f3. But it's the spirit is the same. And let's say after queen f2, excuse me, not queen f2, rook f2, queen d7 to guard here, rook a f1, and you see this triple stack on the back rank here. He's threatening to come up here, and you might just very well give up the two rooks for the queen in this position, or play a move like queen g6 here. Okay, but the spirit is the same in that White realizes that he can't just make like a defense, like some kind of defensive move here. He might be able to do it, but it takes time away, and time is of the essence in this position. So knight e2, I mean, then White, then Black can start unraveling. Maybe b6, right? Get this guy out. This is blocked. So he decides on d5. He wants to just crash through. So c takes d5, knight takes d5, and just putting the pressure on the white position. c4, fantastic move, because again, if knight takes, then you have these two pass pawns right in the center of the board. It's just restriction city. Bishop d7. So Naka is just desperately trying to get developed, and I know this position is killing him because he's a dynamic player. Dynamic players like free piece play and attacking to be able to do something, and he's just having to play this kind of squeeze, trying to squeeze out of a bind here. Right, queen g4. Of course, a provocative move with the bishop here. Excuse me. Knight f8, right? Nakamura is provoked by by this move. Queen f3, the easy ace up the sleeve to have. Knight g6. Naka puts some pressure right here on the pawn. Now, rook d1. Rook a d1. I'm sorry, got to tell you which rook. Knight e6. Sorry about the dogs barking. Going crazy. They're looking at the Kramnik Advantage game. They're going crazy over that. And they're also going crazy over Nishikiri. Alright, knight e6. h4. Again, we see his dynamic chess right here. What's the idea? The idea is if knight takes h4, then the queen comes roaring in. Then you have this attack against his bishop. What else to do? Queen b6, rook f2, knight to g5, and then queen takes with a great position for white here. So Naka plays bishop to a4, which I did not really like that much. It's just too easy to refute the play there. Rook d6, hitting the queen, or even a move like knight d5. But at this point, he's in trouble. And queen c5 is pretty much forced because you got a guard back there, and he wants to maintain the pin. Then simply move like rook rook to f1, and now of course this is still under attack, so knight g5, then you just attack, then you just attack both pieces here. Fedoseev played rook d6, and just so you know, Naka was in tremendous time trouble here, and this lets me know, indicates that he was very uncomfortable with the position for a long time. He only had 3 minutes on the clock. Fedoseev had almost a half an hour, so he must have been prepared this especially for Naka, maybe seen some of his games and figured he can catch him out there in this rare defense. And he probably knew Naka's style being dynamic. Like if I was looking at this and I was like, what would Naka play against the four knights? I would pick the Rubinstein variation in a second. because he doesn't like to play boring symmetrical type positions, you know. So he kind of like fell into this the situation here. Rook d6. So this is attacked, and this is attacked. Simple tactic, right? Double attack is really the only move. Try to get out of it. Attack the queen. Of course, we're keeping the queens on the board with the attack going, right? Naka is attacking this, relying on this pin here. This kind of forces the trade of queens. Rook takes b6. Knight takes e7. Rook takes b7. And Naka just can't get a break here. I mean, all of the all of the tactics are just continuously in White's favor, and that's just because Naka entered in, had this bad position. It all started with the pretty much with that exchange, sacrificing the pawn advances in the center. Black is just up 2 pawns with the better position here. Even though Black is up the exchange, his pieces never reached the level of coordination that was required to even make that look semi-effective. This constant harassment from White made it impossible for Nakamura to gather his pieces together. Again, just more harassment there. Great move. Rook is unprotected temporarily. He just snatches another pawn. Naka in desperation mode. And now it's just an easy win for Fedoseev. And he starts pushing these babies up the board. And after G takes h3, bishop d7, rook takes. Again, a couple of last gasp efforts from Nakamura trying to win the rook after rook takes g5. But this is called cashing in, right? He just makes a move here that kind of just seals the deal. Of course, this forces the king to have to go here, and then you take with check, and then with all of these pawns, somebody is going to be a queen. Again, sorry for the dogs in the background, but that is the end of the video because Nakamura resigned at that point after rook takes g7. So anyway, that is the end for today on that video, and please comment, like, and subscribe. Sorry about the dogs once again. I see you guys on the next video.